Snow fell in thick, unrelenting sheets over Cedar Hill Cemetery, burying the world in silence. The gravestones, once standing in solemn rows, were now nearly hidden beneath the heavy white frost. The wind howled through the leafless trees, carrying with it a biting chill that could drive even the hardiest of creatures into shelter. Yet, amid this frozen desolation, a single figure lay unmoving. Titan. The silver-gray Pitbull was stretched across a small, freshly covered grave, his massive frame dusted with ice. His once strong body was visibly thinner, his ribs beginning to show beneath his matted coat. Snowflakes settled onto his fur, melting only to refreeze, forming a crystalline layer over him. He did not flinch, did not shiver. His breath came in slow, measured puffs, the only sign that he was still alive. His amber eyes remained locked on the simple headstone in front of him, where a child's name was etched into the cold granite: Emily Carter. For 15 days, Titan had refused to move. He had ignored the bitter cold, the relentless snowfall, and the concerned voices of those who tried to coax him away. Visitors to the cemetery had taken notice, and soon word spread through the small town. People brought food, blankets, even tried to tempt him with warm shelter, but Titan rejected it all. "What kind of dog stays in a place like this?" a woman murmured, clutching her coat tighter around herself as she observed from a distance. "I heard he belonged to that little girl," a groundskeeper replied, shaking his head. "The one who—" He trailed off, glancing toward the grave, the weight of the unspoken words pressing heavy between them. Then, one morning, a local news reporter arrived with a camera crew. They had come to cover the strange, heart-wrenching story of the Pitbull who refused to leave his owner's grave. The journalist, bundled in layers against the cold, approached cautiously, speaking softly as the camera operator zoomed in on Titan's still form. 15 days, she narrated, her voice tinged with emotion. This Pitbull, identified as Titan, has remained here, lying on the final resting place of 6-year-old Emily Carter. No one can explain why he won't leave, why he refuses food or warmth. The only thing clear is his unwavering loyalty. What could have happened between them? What is keeping him here? As the footage aired later that evening, the story quickly gained traction. Social media lit up with comments and theories. Some people claimed it was just canine loyalty, the heartbreaking instinct of a dog unwilling to part with the one he loved. Others whispered of something deeper, something unexplainable, a connection that transcended life and death. "What if he's waiting for her?" one comment read beneath the video. The idea sent a shiver through those who saw it. Could Titan somehow believe that Emily would come back? That if he just stayed long enough, she would return to him? Meanwhile, the storm worsened. Snow piled high, turning the cemetery into a frozen wasteland. Despite this, Titan remained. His body was stiff with cold, his movements sluggish when he shifted, but still, he refused to leave. Late at night, when the town was asleep, the cemetery stood eerily quiet, save for the occasional gusts of wind rattling the bare branches. A lone street lamp flickered at the entrance, casting long, shifting shadows over the snow-covered ground. Titan's silhouette, still and unwavering, was a stark figure against the pale white surroundings. Then, just past midnight, a figure emerged through the swirling snow. A woman, bundled tightly in a thick coat, her scarf pulled high over her face, trudged through the drifts, her boots crunching against the frozen ground. She had been there before many times over the past 2 weeks, always watching from a distance, always hesitating. Tonight, she moved with determination. Titan's ears twitched as the woman drew closer, the first sign of movement from him in hours. His muscles tensed slightly, but he did not rise. His gaze, weary yet watchful, flicked up to meet hers. She stopped a few feet away, breathless from the cold and emotion that threatened to consume her. "You knew this would happen?" Her voice cracked, barely audible over the wind. She knelt in the snow, ignoring the cold that bit into her skin, and reached a trembling hand toward the dog. "My little girl knew you would never leave her." The words hung in the freezing air, unspoken grief thick between them. For a moment, neither of them moved, just a woman, a dog, and the empty grave between them. Titan let out a low, weary sigh and lowered his head, pressing his nose against the snow-covered earth. As the storm raged on around them, the mystery of Titan's vigil only deepened. What had happened before Emily's death? Why was Titan so determined to stay? No one knew it yet, but this was only the beginning. Emily Carter had always lived in a world of silence. At 6 years old, she rarely spoke, her voice locked away behind a barrier that no amount of therapy, structured routines, or specialized learning programs had managed to break. While other children her age chattered endlessly, Emily communicated through her drawings, her small hands moving with quiet precision as she sketched out the only reality she could truly control. Her world was one of patterns, colors, and order, where emotions could be captured with pencil strokes rather than words. Her father, David Carter, understood that world in a way few others did. As an investigative journalist, he had spent his career uncovering hidden truths, exposing corruption, and bringing darkness into the light. But at home, with Emily, he often felt powerless. No matter how many reports he read about autism or how many experts he interviewed, nothing seemed to truly reach his daughter. Her mother, Amanda Carter, approached things differently. As a respected child psychologist, she believed in science, in evidence-based therapy, in controlled environments where progress could be measured. She had dedicated her career to understanding children like Emily, but her own daughter remained an enigma to her, one she was determined to solve with patience and carefully structured methods. Then, one autumn afternoon, Titan entered their lives. David had been on assignment in a rural area when he found the Pitbull. The dog had been wandering near the site of a recent wildfire, his once strong body weakened by burns and exhaustion. His silver-gray coat was marred by old scars, and his eyes, though sharp, carried the weight of something broken. He was alone, abandoned, and yet there was something in his stance, an unwavering resilience that caught David's attention. David took the dog to a local shelter where he learned Titan had no microchip, no tags, and no known owner. The staff mentioned that he had likely been a rescue dog, possibly trained for search and recovery missions, given his physical build and alertness. But whatever his past had been, it was clear no one was coming for him. He was another forgotten creature, left to be discarded. Maybe it was the journalist in him, always drawn to the overlooked. Or maybe it was the father in him, desperate to find something, anything, that might reach Emily. Whatever the reason, David signed the adoption papers and brought Titan home. Amanda was not pleased. "You brought home a stray pit bull?" she asked, arms crossed as she eyed the dog warily. "Without discussing it with me?" "He's not just a stray," David countered. "He's trained. He's intelligent, and maybe, just maybe, he can help Emily." Amanda scoffed. "You're grasping at straws. She doesn't even acknowledge people, and you think a dog is going to change that?" But it wasn't David who proved her wrong. It was Emily. The moment Titan stepped into the house, Emily lifted her head from her drawings. Her eyes, usually distant, locked onto the dog. She didn't recoil. She didn't look away. Then, to their astonishment, she slowly got up and walked toward him. Titan remained perfectly still as Emily reached out, her small fingers hesitating just inches from his fur. No one breathed. And then, with a touch so soft it was almost imperceptible, she laid her hand on his head. For the first time in her life, Emily had voluntarily touched something, someone, that wasn't her parents. From that moment, something shifted. Titan became Emily's shadow, her silent protector. When loud noises startled her, he would instinctively step in front of her, acting as a barrier between her and the overwhelming world. When she struggled with sensory overload, he would press his body against her, grounding her. And when the world became too much, she would sit beside him, running her fingers through his fur, her breathing steadying in sync with his. Then came the drawings. Every day, Emily would take her sketchbook and draw Titan. Not just once or twice, but over and over. In every picture, he was there, standing beside her, sitting at her feet, or curled up near her. He wasn't just a part of her world, he was her world. One evening, Amanda found Emily in her room, meticulously sketching another image of Titan. She hesitated in the doorway, torn between skepticism and the undeniable evidence in front of her. "You draw him a lot," she said cautiously. Emily didn't look up, but after a pause she nodded. Amanda's breath caught. A response. A real, intentional response. A few days later, something even more astonishing happened. David had been playing with Titan in the backyard when Emily, watching from the window, suddenly let out a small sound, almost a laugh. Amanda rushed in, disbelief etched on her face. "Did she just—" David turned, a grin spreading. "She did." For the first time, Emily had laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a full-out giggle like other children her age might have had, but it was real. And it was because of Titan. That was the moment Amanda began to see what David had seen from the start. Titan wasn't just a dog. He was something more. He had reached Emily in a way no therapy session, no carefully crafted exercise ever had. He had given her something neither of them had been able to: comfort, trust, and connection. As the days turned into weeks, Emily's bond with Titan deepened. She would whisper to him when she thought no one was listening. She would reach for his fur when she felt overwhelmed. And she would follow him with unwavering trust, as if he were the compass guiding her through a world she had never quite understood. Titan had become more than just a pet. He was her anchor. What no one knew then was just how much Emily would come to depend on him, and just how much Titan would be willing to do for her in return. David Carter had spent years uncovering hidden truths, exposing corruption, and bringing criminals to justice. But he had never imagined that one day, his own family would be caught in the crosshairs of something far more dangerous than he had ever anticipated. It started with an investigation, one that, at first, seemed like just another case. Reports had surfaced about illegal animal trafficking, a network operating in the shadows, taking dogs from shelters and training them for underground operations. Some were used for brutal purposes, while others were subjected to inhumane conditions, turned into tools for people who saw them as nothing more than disposable assets. David had received a tip about one of these operations, an anonymous email that led him to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. What he found there made his stomach turn. The place reeked of fear, a foul mix of sweat, blood, and decay. Crates lined the walls, each one holding a dog, some barely clinging to life, others pacing frantically, their bodies bearing the scars of cruelty. But the worst part wasn't just the conditions. It was the discovery that this was only a small piece of something much larger. As David dug deeper, he found that the organization had ties to several criminal syndicates, using these dogs for illegal activities, from smuggling to intimidation. But there was one unsettling detail that caught his attention. Certain dogs were marked. They bore a specific scar, a precise cut along their left ear, something that seemed intentional, a form of branding. That's when everything clicked. Titan had that same scar. At first, David thought it was just an old wound, something from the dog's past before he had found him. But as he looked through the reports, scanning through recovered footage and photos from previous raids, he saw it. Dogs with that same mark, all linked to this organization. Titan hadn't just been abandoned. He had escaped. But there was something even more alarming. Further investigation revealed that some of the dogs in this network had been implanted with tracking chips, not ordinary identification microchips, but custom-made devices that stored data. Routes, transactions, drop-off points, all encoded within them. These chips weren't just for tracking, they contained evidence. A chilling thought struck David. Could Titan have one of these chips inside him? He didn't want to believe it. But as he ran his fingers over Titan's thick fur, he felt something small and firm, just beneath the skin near the back of his neck. His heart pounded. Titan wasn't just a survivor, he was a walking vault of information. And if the people who ran this operation realized he was still alive, they would come for him. David wasted no time. He contacted a trusted veterinarian under the guise of a routine checkup. As soon as the vet scanned Titan, the machine beeped. A foreign chip was embedded in him, one not registered in any standard pet database. David's instincts screamed at him that this was dangerous. He had seen criminals destroy entire case files, erase digital records, and silence witnesses. But this time, their evidence wasn't something that could be deleted. It was inside a living, breathing animal, and they would do anything to get rid of it. It didn't take long for the organization to realize their mistake. They had assumed Titan was gone, either lost or dead. But then, rumors spread. A news segment about a loyal Pitbull refusing to leave a child's grave made its way to the wrong set of eyes. Someone recognized the scar. Someone put the pieces together. And suddenly, David wasn't just an investigative journalist anymore. He was a target. It started with subtle signs. A black SUV parked across the street from their home for too long, vanishing the moment David stepped outside. Strange calls in the middle of the night, silence on the other end. Then, one evening, Titan's ears perked up, his entire body tensing as he growled at the window. David looked out and saw nothing. But Titan didn't relax. Something was coming. A few nights later, his suspicions were confirmed. The security camera on his porch caught a dark figure lurking near the backyard. It was quick, barely more than a shadow moving through the night. But it was enough. Someone had been watching. David knew he had no choice. He had to find out what was on that chip. Working through the night, he carefully extracted the chip from Titan and connected it to his laptop through an adapter. A series of encrypted files appeared on the screen. Locations, dates, names. It was all there, proof of their entire operation. And then, the final piece of horror. One of the recent entries was marked with an urgent note. Find and eliminate the loose end. The Carter dog. They were coming for Titan. And if they knew where Titan was, it meant they knew about David, knew about his family. The realization sent ice through his veins. This wasn't just about a story anymore. It was about survival. The diagnosis came on an ordinary afternoon, shattering the fragile peace that had settled in the Carter household. David and Amanda sat in the sterile, white-walled doctor's office, their hands intertwined in an unconscious attempt to steady each other. The pediatric oncologist's words came slowly, carefully measured, but no amount of gentle phrasing could soften the weight of what they were hearing. Emily had cancer, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The prognosis was uncertain, but the treatment would be aggressive. Chemotherapy, hospital stays, a long and painful battle. Amanda's breath caught in her throat. David felt his stomach twist into knots. The world blurred at the edges, everything narrowing to the sight of their little girl in the other room, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to upend her life. Titan knew something was wrong before anyone spoke a word. The moment they stepped through the front door that evening, he was there, his deep amber eyes locked onto Emily. He sniffed at her, his body going rigid with an alertness that neither parent had seen before. When Emily, who usually took her time acknowledging anything outside her drawings, immediately reached out and pressed her small hands into his fur, Amanda had to bite back a sob. From that day forward, Titan became more than Emily's protector. He became her anchor. The hospital was a world of bright lights and unfamiliar sounds, a place that overwhelmed Emily in ways she couldn't express. The sterile smell, the beeping machines, the endless poking and prodding. It was too much. But Titan was there. Whenever Emily's breathing grew erratic, when her body stiffened at the touch of a needle or the hum of fluorescent lights, Titan would press against her side, grounding her. He knew when she needed him before she did, nudging her hand when she trembled, resting his heavy head on her lap when exhaustion overtook her. The nurses whispered about it in the hallways. They had seen therapy dogs before, but Titan was different. He didn't just comfort her, he understood her. David and Amanda clung to the small victories. A day when Emily ate without needing coaxing. A moment when she let a doctor examine her without recoiling. A rare, soft giggle when Titan licked her cheek in the middle of a difficult treatment. But the victories became fewer. The setbacks more frequent. Emily grew weaker. Her body, once so full of quiet strength, became fragile. Her hair thinned. The color drained from her face. Amanda spent nights at her bedside, holding her tiny hand, whispering promises that she wasn't sure she believed. David poured himself into research, desperate for something, anything, that could buy them more time. Through it all, Titan never left her side. Then came the night when Emily spoke the words that shattered them all. She had been quiet most of the evening, curled against Titan, her tiny fingers tracing patterns in his fur. David and Amanda sat nearby, watching in silence, afraid to disturb the fragile peace that had settled over the room. Then, in a voice barely louder than a breath, Emily whispered into Titan's ear, "If I can't stay, you'll have to promise to help other kids like me." Amanda inhaled sharply, her chest tightening. David's fingers curled into a fist. Titan let out a soft whine and nudged her hand, as if to tell her he understood, as if to tell her he would keep that promise. That was the last time Emily spoke. That night she slipped into sleep and never woke up. The house felt wrong without her, too quiet, too empty. Amanda sat at the edge of Emily's bed, staring at the sheets, unable to move, unable to comprehend a world where her daughter no longer existed. Titan lay beside her, unmoving. He had stayed there all night, his head resting where Emily's small hand had last been. He didn't eat. He barely blinked. David had seen grief in many forms, but never like this. Never so absolute. The day of the funeral arrived, cold and gray. The cemetery was filled with people, friends and family who whispered condolences, who placed flowers beside a casket too small, who wept for a child who had barely begun her life. Titan stood by David's side, silent, his expression unreadable. When they lowered the casket into the ground, he let out a low, mournful sound, a sound that sent shivers through everyone who heard it. Amanda watched in stunned silence as Titan approached the grave, lowered himself onto the fresh earth, and placed his head against it. He wouldn't move. For hours he lay there, even as the mourners left, even as the sky darkened. Amanda knelt beside him, her voice breaking. "Titan, please." He didn't acknowledge her. David tried to pull him away, but the dog resisted, his body locked in place as though waiting for something, someone, that would never come. That night, when they returned home, Titan was gone. David searched the neighborhood. Amanda called for him, her voice hoarse. But Titan had disappeared into the cold night, vanishing like a ghost. And no one knew where he had gone. The storm raged through the night, howling winds rattling against the skeletal trees of Cedar Hill Cemetery. Snow blanketed the ground in thick, blinding waves, swallowing the world in an endless sea of white. Most of the town had shut itself inside, safe from the unforgiving cold. But Titan was still out there, running through the darkness, his body cutting through the snowdrifts like a phantom. He wasn't running without purpose. He was being hunted. The men had come shortly after Emily's funeral, their presence like shadows lurking just out of sight. At first, it was subtle. Cars parked too long at the end of the street, figures watching from alleyways. Then they grew bolder. David had caught a glimpse of one of them outside his office, a man with a scar running down his cheek, staring at him for just a second too long before disappearing into the crowd. He had known then that something was wrong. Titan had known too. The first attack came late at night. David had been up, staring at Emily's empty room, when Titan suddenly shot to his feet. His ears flattened, his muscles tensed. Then came the crash. The sound of breaking glass downstairs. By the time David reached the bottom of the stairs, Titan was already there, standing between him and the dark figure that had forced its way inside. The intruder barely had time to react before Titan lunged, his powerful jaws snapping just inches from the man's hand. A gun was raised. A single shot rang out. Titan dodged at the last second, the bullet grazing his shoulder instead of finding its mark. He let out a deep, guttural growl, a sound so primal and fierce that the man hesitated, just long enough for David to grab the nearest object, a fireplace poker, and swing. The intruder stumbled back, clutching his head. Titan didn't wait for another opening. He charged, slamming his full weight into the man, sending him crashing through the broken glass of the window and out into the snow-covered yard. David barely had time to catch his breath before he saw the others. Two more figures waiting beyond the tree line, their faces hidden by scarves and hoods. Watching, waiting. They weren't here for him. They were here for Titan. David grabbed his phone, his fingers shaking as he called the police. But Titan had already made his decision. He ran. He tore through the yard, his paws kicking up snow, his body moving with purpose. He wasn't running in fear. He was leading them away. David shouted for him to stop, but Titan didn't look back. The men followed, disappearing into the storm. The chase lasted for hours through the abandoned streets and snow-covered fields. Titan's body ached, the wound in his shoulder slowing him down, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. If he did, they would find their way back to the Carters, and that he would never allow. The men had come prepared. They had something, an old, distorted frequency, a sound they broadcast through a handheld device. It was meant to trigger something in Titan's brain, to force obedience, to erase whatever freedom he had found. But Titan wasn't the same dog he had once been. The first time the sound hit him, he staggered. His vision blurred, his muscles seized. Memories surged through him, flashes of cages, of commands barked in harsh voices, of pain. But then he saw her, Emily, the memory of her small hand resting against his fur, the way she had looked at him, not with fear or control, but with trust. And he fought back. With a growl, Titan shook off the paralysis and charged forward, crashing into the nearest attacker before the man could react. A knife slashed through the air. Pain erupted along Titan's side, but he didn't stop. He sank his teeth into the man's arm, twisting, forcing him to drop the device. The frequency cut off. The second attacker raised a gun. A single shot. Titan felt the impact, felt the searing pain in his leg, but he didn't go down. Instead, he lunged, knocking the man off balance, sending both of them tumbling into the snow. Sirens howled in the distance. David had called for help. The men panicked. One of them tried to run, disappearing into the blizzard, but the other was too slow. Titan forced himself to stand, his legs trembling beneath him, but he held his ground, his blood staining the snow beneath him. The police arrived in a blur of flashing lights and shouted orders. The man who had shot Titan was restrained, his wrists forced behind his back. Officers spread out, searching for the one who had escaped. David arrived moments later, falling to his knees beside Titan. His hands hovered over the wounds, his voice shaking. "You did it," he whispered. "You saved us." Titan let out a low breath, his body weakening, but his eyes remained locked onto David's. He had done what he needed to do. He had kept his promise, but he wasn't ready to leave yet. Against all odds, Titan survived. The wounds were deep, the recovery long, but when he finally stood again, there was no doubt. He had won his freedom. The men who had hunted him were behind bars, but one had escaped. And deep down, David knew. The fight wasn't over yet. Snow still clung to the corners of the Carter family's home, a stubborn reminder of the storm that had nearly taken everything from them. Though the town had begun to move on from the chaos, David remained uneasy. The men who had hunted Titan were behind bars, but not all of them. One had escaped into the night, vanishing before the police could track him down. That fact alone made it impossible for David to relax. He kept his doors locked, his phone always within reach. Amanda watched him closely, seeing the tension that never left his shoulders. "It's over," she told him one evening. "Titan is safe. We're safe." David nodded, but he didn't believe it. Titan didn't believe it either. The Pitbull, still recovering from his wounds, remained hyper-aware of his surroundings. Every time the front door opened, he watched it like a sentry. When David walked into the backyard, Titan followed, scanning the perimeter as if expecting another threat to emerge from the shadows. And then, the phone call came. Sergeant Daniel Reeves, a veteran officer in the Maplewood Police Department, had been one of the first responders the night Titan was nearly taken. He was one of the few people David trusted outside of his family. When Reeves called and asked to meet privately, David didn't hesitate. "There's still a loose end," Reeves said when they met at a small diner on the edge of town. "The guy who got away, our team is close to tracking him down, but there's a problem." David frowned. "What kind of problem?" Reeves leaned in, lowering his voice. "Somebody's been leaking information from inside the department. Whoever it is, they're careful. We think they might be feeding intel back to the organization." David's stomach twisted. "You think it's someone on the force?" Reeves nodded grimly. "I need you to be careful. If they're still after Titan, they might come at you from an angle you don't expect." David returned home unsettled. That night he locked the doors twice, but none of it mattered, because the threat was already inside. The next morning, Officer Reeves knocked on their door. His expression was calm, professional, just another officer checking in after a traumatic event. Amanda let him in, relieved to see a familiar face. David came downstairs, Titan padding silently behind him. The dog had taken to shadowing him, never letting him out of his sight. Reeves held up a small evidence bag. "I need to talk to you, David. It's about the chip." David tensed. "What about it?" "The department needs to secure it. I know you've been keeping it, but it's safer if we take it into official custody. Just for precaution." Something about the way he said it made David pause. Titan let out a low growl. Reeves barely glanced at the dog. "I know you don't trust many people right now, but I need you to hand it over." David's mind raced. Reeves was the one who warned him about the mole. But now, he was the one asking for the chip? "Who else knows you're here?" David asked carefully. Reeves hesitated, a fraction of a second too long. Titan's growl deepened. David had spent years reading people. It was his job to know when someone was lying. And in that moment, he saw it. Just a flicker of something in Reeves's eyes, a crack in the mask. "You're the leak," David realized, his voice barely above a whisper. Reeves exhaled sharply. "David," but Titan moved before he could finish. With a snarl, the pit bull lunged, muscles coiling as he launched himself at Reeves. The officer barely had time to react before Titan slammed into him, knocking him backward. The evidence bag fell from his hand. Amanda gasped, stepping back as Reeves struggled beneath Titan's weight. "Call the police," David ordered, reaching for the gun he had started keeping hidden beneath the staircase. Reeves twisted, shoving Titan off of him just enough to reach for his belt, but Titan was faster. Before Reeves could pull his weapon, the pit bull sank his teeth into his arm, forcing a cry of pain from the man's lips. Blood stained his uniform as he thrashed, but Titan didn't let go. David leveled his gun at the officer. "Don't move." Reeves stilled, his chest rising and falling in short, panicked breaths. Titan didn't release him. The sirens arrived minutes later, red and blue lights flashing across the Carter family's yard. Officers rushed in, taking Reeves into custody, forcing him to his knees as they secured his hands behind his back. One of the detectives, someone David trusted, approached him. "How did you know?" David exhaled, glancing down at Titan, who still stood tense, his body positioned protectively in front of the family. "I didn't," David admitted, "but Titan did." The pit bull looked up at him then, his amber eyes filled with something David had come to understand as pure, unwavering loyalty. Titan had saved them again, and this time, there was no one left to chase them. The world had changed for Titan. He was no longer just a dog, no longer just a survivor of the past. He had become something else, something larger than himself. The scars on his body would always remain, silent reminders of the battles he had fought. But he had won, and more than that, he had found a purpose, one that stretched beyond the pain and the loss, beyond the storm that had nearly taken everything from him. In the months that followed, David and Amanda dedicated themselves to something new, something born from tragedy, yet filled with hope. They called it Titan's Promise, a therapy center unlike any other, built in honor of Emily and the bond she had shared with Titan. It wasn't just a place where children could come to interact with therapy animals. It was a place where children like Emily, those who lived in their own worlds, behind walls that seemed impossible to break, could find connection. The grand opening was a quiet affair, intentionally small, though the word had already spread far beyond their town. News stories had told of Titan's loyalty, his courage, and the way he had refused to leave Emily's side. But to David and Amanda, this was never about headlines. It was about keeping a promise, Emily's last wish. Titan was at the center of it all. His injuries had healed, though he moved a little slower now, carrying the weight of his experiences in the way he walked. But his spirit was unchanged. He greeted each visitor with calm attentiveness, his deep amber eyes always watching, always understanding. David often caught himself thinking about the past, about the dog he had rescued from the ashes, about the way Emily had seen something in Titan that no one else had. It had never been about saving Titan. Titan had been the one saving them all along. And now, he would continue doing just that. It was a cold autumn afternoon when she arrived. A small girl, no older than 5, with dark curls framing her delicate face. She clung tightly to her mother's hand, her little fingers gripping the fabric of her sleeve as if letting go would mean being lost in a sea of unfamiliarity. Her name was Lily. David had seen that look before, the same guarded eyes, the same uncertainty. He had seen it in Emily. Lily's mother spoke quietly to Amanda, her voice filled with the same mixture of hope and exhaustion that David and Amanda had once known all too well. "She doesn't talk much," her mother said. "She gets overwhelmed easily. We've tried everything, but—" She trailed off, glancing down at her daughter, who hadn't moved since stepping into the room. Amanda offered her a gentle smile. "Would you like to meet Titan?" Lily didn't answer. She only shrank back slightly, her hands twisting in the hem of her shirt. Titan, who had been resting nearby, lifted his head at the sound of his name. He didn't rush forward, he never did. Instead, he simply observed, his body relaxed, his movements slow and deliberate. He knew. He always knew. Lily's mother knelt beside her. "It's okay, sweetheart. Titan is very gentle." Still, Lily didn't move. Titan took a single step forward. Lily stiffened. Titan stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. David, Amanda, and Lily's mother held their breaths, waiting, hoping. Then, slowly, Titan did something unexpected. He lowered himself completely, pressing his chest to the floor, lowering his head until his nose nearly touched the ground. It was a posture of complete submission, not dominance, not insistence, just quiet patience. Lily's tiny fingers twitched. She took a step forward, then another. Titan didn't move. He let her come to him, her small frame trembling with hesitation. She reached out. Her hand hovered just above his silver-gray fur, barely an inch away. David saw it then, the moment it happened, the moment fear gave way to something else. Lily touched Titan, just for a second. Then, for the first time since she walked in, she smiled. A tiny, hesitant smile, but real. Her mother gasped softly, her eyes welling up with tears. Amanda reached for David's hand, gripping it tightly as they watched the impossible unfold. Again. Titan remained perfectly still, allowing Lily to choose how far she wanted to go. And when she touched him a second time, this time curling her fingers into his fur, he let out a soft, contented huff, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. Because maybe he had. Lily turned to her mother, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dog?" The word was small, simple, but it was everything. Lily's mother covered her mouth with her hands, letting out a choked sob of relief. David swallowed hard, feeling the weight of what had just happened. Titan had done it again. He had reached another child, just like Emily had wanted. That night, after the center had closed for the day, David sat on the front steps of Titan's promise, watching the sun set behind the trees. The crisp air carried the scent of autumn, and for the first time in a long time, he felt peace. Titan sat beside him, gazing out at the horizon. David reached down, running his fingers through the dog's fur. "She would be proud of you, you know." Titan didn't respond, but he didn't need to. Because David knew. Emily's promise hadn't died with her. It had only just begun. At its heart, Titan's promise is a story about love that transcends loss, about loyalty that defies reason, and about the invisible bonds that connect us in ways words never could. It is a testament to the idea that even in the face of tragedy, hope finds a way to endure, if we let it. Titan was more than just a dog. He was a protector, a bridge between worlds, a silent guardian who understood more than most people ever could. Where others saw a lost child, Titan saw Emily for who she truly was. Where others saw a broken dog, Emily saw a friend who needed her just as much as she needed him. Their connection was unbreakable, even by death. But the lesson Titan carried forward, the one Emily whispered to him in her final moments, was that love should not be trapped in grief. It should be carried forward, shared, given freely to those who need it most. Grief, after all, is just love with nowhere to go. Titan could have stayed by Emily's grave forever, lost in sorrow. But Emily's last wish guided him toward a greater purpose, to help others, to heal, to become the hope for children like her. And isn't that the greatest legacy anyone can leave behind? Not just the memories of who they were, but the ripples of change they create in the lives of others? We are not meant to stay in the past. Love does not die. It transforms. Titan's journey is a reminder that even in our darkest moments, there is a way forward. That loss does not mean the end of love, but the beginning of something new. Because love, when shared, never truly leaves us. It lives on, in the lives we touch, in the hope we create, and in the silent promises we keep. Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story. Together, we can shine a light on the power of doing what's right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.